The door slammed open before Elena Marsh could grab her blouse off the chair. She froze, one arm halfway through the sleeve, her heart slamming against her ribs, as the tall shape of Dante Calloway filled the doorway of his private office. For one long second, neither of them moved. The lamp on his desk threw a warm light across the room, and there was nowhere for her to hide, no screen, no wall, nothing but the sudden silence between them. "I forgot my phone," he said, his voice rough, his eyes locked on hers before he forced them away. "I didn't think anyone was still here." "I was just changing," Elena said, pulling the blouse closed with shaking hands. "I spilled coffee on my shirt an hour ago. I didn't want to walk out looking like this." Dante turned his back to her immediately, his broad shoulders rigid, his jaw tight. "I'll wait outside." He stepped into the hallway and shut the door, and Elena stood there in the sudden quiet, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had worked for him for 8 months. She had seen him yell at grown men until they flinched. She had watched him walk into rooms and silence conversations just by existing, but she had never seen him look away from anything before tonight. She finished dressing quickly, smoothing her skirt, checking her reflection in the small mirror by the coat rack. Her cheeks were flushed, and she hated that she couldn't control it. She grabbed her bag, took a breath, and opened the door. Dante was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing in particular. When he saw her, something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have knocked." "It's fine," Elena said, though her voice betrayed her. "It was an accident." Still, he rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had never seen him make. "It won't happen again." "I know." She tried to smile, but it came out thin. "Good night, Mr. Calloway." "Dante," he said suddenly, "you've worked for me long enough. You don't have to call me that." She blinked, caught off guard by the offer, small as it was. "Good night, Dante." She walked past him toward the elevator, feeling his eyes on her the entire way, and she didn't dare turn around until the doors closed and she was alone with her own reflection in the brushed steel. Her hands were still trembling. She pressed them flat against her stomach and made herself breathe. By the time she got home to her small apartment on the edge of the city, the shock had faded into something else, something she didn't want to look at too closely. She told herself it meant nothing. He was her boss. He ran half the shipping contracts and warehouses on the west side of the city, and everyone who worked near him knew there were things about his business that were never discussed out loud. Doors that were never opened, men who came and went at odd hours with faces that never smiled. Elena had learned early to keep her head down, do her job well, and not ask questions. She managed his schedule, organized his contracts, translated his short, clipped instructions into polished emails that made him sound reasonable, even when he wasn't. It was a good job. It paid better than anything she'd had before. She could not afford to let one strange, awkward moment turn into something that cost her everything. She told herself that all night. She almost believed it by morning. The next day, she arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to settle into her routine before Dante came in, hoping the ordinary rhythm of coffee and paperwork would erase the strangeness of the night before. But he was already there, sitting behind his desk with the door open, which was unusual. He normally kept it closed until he wanted something. "Morning," he said without looking up from his laptop. "Good morning." Elena set her bag down at her desk outside his office and busied herself with the mail, sorting invoices from personal letters, trying to look like a woman who hadn't spent half the night replaying an accidental glance in her head. He appeared in the doorway a moment later, holding a folder. "I need you to reschedule the meeting with the dock supervisors. Push it to Thursday." "Of course." "And call Marco about the delivery delay. Tell him if it happens again, we're finding someone else. I'll handle it." He hesitated, folder still in hand, looking at her in a way that made her skin warm. "Elena." "Yes?" "About last night. It's already forgotten," she said quickly, too quickly, and she saw something shift in his expression, something like disappointment, though she couldn't be sure. "Right," he said. "Good." He turned and walked back into his office, and the door didn't close, which felt like its own kind of statement, though she didn't know what it meant. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls and rescheduled meetings. Elena kept herself busy. kept her voice steady, kept her eyes on her screen whenever Dante walked past her desk. She told herself she was imagining the way his gaze lingered a beat too long, the way he found small reasons to stop by her desk that he never used to bother with. By early afternoon, her nerves had settled into something more manageable, until Victor Salazar walked into the office unannounced. Elena had met Victor twice before, both times at business dinners where he had shaken her hand a little too long and complimented her a little too openly. He ran a rival shipping company, and though their businesses often crossed paths, there was always something cold beneath his polished smile, something that made Elena's instincts prickle. "Elena," Victor said now, leaning against the edge of her desk as if he owned it. "You look lovely today. Dante's a lucky man, having someone like you keep his world in order." "Mr. Salazar," she said evenly, "Dante's expecting you. I'll let him know you're here." "No rush." Victor's eyes traveled over her in a way that made her want to fold her arms across her chest. "I always tell him he should let you sit in on our meetings, instead of hiding you out here answering phones. A woman with your kind of presence shouldn't be wasted. I'll let him know you're here," Elena repeated, standing and walking to Dante's door before Victor could say anything else. She knocked once and stepped inside. "Victor Salazar is here for the 2 o'clock. Dante's expression darkened instantly, though not, she suspected, because of the meeting itself. "Send him in." Victor sauntered past her a moment later, and Elena returned to her desk, trying to focus on her work, though she could hear the low rumble of voices through the door, the tone growing sharper as the minutes passed. She caught fragments, numbers, deadlines, a mention of the docs, and then something that made her go still. "You should let your secretary handle more of the negotiations," Victor was saying, his voice carrying easily through the door. "She's clearly wasted answering your phone, unless there's a reason you're keeping her close, Dante. Something a little more personal." There was a pause, long enough that Elena's stomach tightened. "Watch your mouth," Dante said, his voice low and dangerous in a way she had never heard directed at anyone but disobedient men on his payroll. "Relax," Victor said, an oily smile audible in his tone. "I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. She's a beautiful woman, Dante. It would be strange if you hadn't noticed." "We're done here," Dante said, and a moment later the door opened and Victor stepped out, straightening his jacket, still wearing that same infuriating smile as he passed Elena's desk. "Have a good afternoon," he said to her, his eyes lingering a moment too long before he left. Elena sat frozen at her desk, her pulse hammering, unsure whether to be more unsettled by Victor's insinuation or by the raw edge in Dante's voice when he'd told him to stop. She heard Dante's office door close hard behind Victor's exit, and for the rest of the afternoon, an uneasy silence settled over the office, broken only by the occasional scrape of a chair or the low murmur of a phone call. At 5 o'clock, when most of the staff had gone home, Dante appeared at her desk again, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "You're still here," he said. "I wanted to finish rescheduling everything for Thursday. You should go home." "I'm almost done." He didn't move away. Instead, he leaned against the edge of her desk, much the way Victor had earlier, though it felt entirely different when Dante did it, less like an intrusion and more like something she didn't have a name for yet. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for Victor, for what he said." "You don't have to apologize for him." "I do, actually." His jaw tightened. "He shouldn't have said any of that, and I shouldn't have let it go on as long as it did." Elena met his eyes, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you." "I mean it, Elena. If he ever says anything like that to you directly, I want you to tell me." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dante was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face as though he were deciding how honest to be. "Because I don't like the way he looks at you," he said finally, "and I don't like what it does to me when he does." The air between them felt suddenly charged, thick with things neither of them was saying outright. Elena's mouth went dry. "Dante." "I know," he said, straightening, putting distance between them as if he'd caught himself doing something he shouldn't. "I know what I am to you, your boss, nothing more. I'm not going to make this complicated for you." "You're not making it complicated," she said quietly, though her heart was racing in a way that suggested otherwise. "I just don't know what to do with any of this." Neither do I, he admitted, and for a moment, the powerful, controlled man she'd worked for looked almost lost, almost human, standing there in the fading afternoon light. Go home, Elena. Get some rest. She gathered her things slowly, aware of him watching her the entire time, and when she reached the elevator, she looked back once. He was still standing by her desk, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that made her chest ache in a way she didn't understand. The ride down was silent except for the hum of the elevator cables, and Elena spent it staring at her own reflection, trying to convince herself that whatever was happening between them could still be stopped before it went any further. She didn't sleep much that night. She lay awake replaying every look, every word, every strange new softness in a man she had believed was made entirely of steel. She told herself it was foolish to feel anything for a man like Dante Calloway, a man whose world was built on danger and secrets, a man who could make people disappear with a single phone call. She told herself that whatever was growing between them was a mistake waiting to happen. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the way he'd looked at her in the doorway of his office, the way his voice had dropped when he warned Victor away from her, the strange, aching honesty in his confession that he didn't know what to do with what he felt either. She woke the next morning with a strange, uneasy feeling that things had already changed, that whatever had started the night he walked in on her could not be undone, no matter how carefully either of them tried to pretend otherwise. She dressed for work slower than usual, checking her reflection twice, telling herself it meant nothing, that she was only being careful, that she would walk into that office and be exactly as professional as she had always been. But as she locked her apartment door and headed out into the gray morning light, she couldn't shake the feeling that her careful, ordinary life was about to be pulled into something far bigger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and that there was no version of the future ahead of her that didn't include Dante Calloway standing somewhere close by, watching her with those same unreadable eyes. She arrived at the building to find 2 black cars parked outside that didn't belong to anyone on staff, their windows tinted, their engines idling. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach as she walked past them toward the entrance, and though she told herself it was nothing, that Dante's world was full of unfamiliar cars and unfamiliar men, she found herself glancing back over her shoulder more than once before she reached the safety of the lobby doors. Upstairs, the office felt different, quieter, tenser. Dante's door was closed, and behind it she could hear voices, low and urgent, though she couldn't make out the words. She sat at her desk and tried to work, but her attention kept drifting to that closed door, to the unfamiliar cars outside, to the strange, electric awareness that had settled over her ever since the night he'd walked in on her changing. Something was shifting, she could feel it, a change in the air, a change in the careful order of her life, and though she had no way of knowing yet how far it would go, she understood, with a certainty that unsettled her, that there was no going back to the way things had been before. The door to Dante's office finally opened, and he stepped out, his expression harder than she'd seen it in months, his eyes finding hers across the room, with a look that was equal parts warning and want. "Elena," he said, "we need to talk." And as she rose from her desk to follow him into his office, she had the distinct, unshakable feeling that whatever he was about to tell her would change everything between them for good. Dante closed the door behind her and turned, running a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she recognized now as a sign of real worry, something she had rarely seen from him. "Victor's been asking questions," he said, "about you. About how long you've worked here, what you know about my business, who you talk to outside this office." "Why would he care about any of that?" "Because men like Victor look for weaknesses," Dante said, his voice low and controlled, though she could hear the tension beneath it. "And he's decided that you might be mine." Elena's stomach dropped. "Am I in danger?" Dante's eyes met hers, and for a long moment he said nothing, as though weighing how much honesty she could handle. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," he said finally. "But I need you to be careful. No talking to strangers about the business. No leaving the building alone after dark until this settles. If anyone approaches you, anyone at all, you call me immediately." "You're scaring me," Elena admitted. "Good," he said, because I need you to take this seriously." She studied him, searching for the calculating businessman she'd worked for all these months. But all she found was a man who looked genuinely afraid, not for himself, but for her. "Why do you care this much?" she asked quietly. "I'm your secretary, Dante. There are a dozen people you could hire to replace me if something happened." "Don't," he said sharply, then softened. "Don't say that. You're not replaceable, Elena. Not to me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded, and Elena felt something inside her chest crack open, some careful wall she'd built to keep herself safe from exactly this kind of moment. "Dante, I know I shouldn't feel this way," he said before she could finish. "I know what I am, and I know what kind of danger comes with being close to me. I've spent the last 2 days trying to convince myself to keep my distance from you, for your own good, and I can't do it." Elena's heart pounded as she took a step closer, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him. "Maybe I don't want you to keep your distance," she said softly. Something shifted in his expression, hope and fear tangled together. "You don't know what you'd be walking into." "Then tell me," she said. "Let me decide for myself." He reached out slowly, as if giving her every chance to step back, and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "This isn't safe, Elena. Nothing about my world is safe." "I'm not asking for safe," she whispered. "I'm asking for honest." For a long moment, neither of them moved, the air between them thick with everything unsaid, and Elena understood, standing there, in the quiet of his office with the city stretching out gray and distant behind him, that whatever came next would change the entire shape of her life, and that despite every warning bell going off in her mind, she wasn't ready to walk away from it. Outside, beyond the tinted windows and the closed door, the city carried on as it always did, indifferent to the storm quietly gathering inside that small office, a storm that would soon pull them both into something neither of them could have predicted, and from which neither of them would emerge unchanged. The black cars stayed parked outside the building for 3 more days, and every morning, Elena walked past them with her heart in her throat, counting the seconds until she was safely inside. Dante had assigned one of his men, a quiet, broad-shouldered driver named Caleb, to bring her to and from work, and though she hated feeling like a prisoner in her own life, she understood, after that conversation in his office, that the danger around her was real. Work continued as it always had on the surface. Phones rang, contracts were signed, deliveries were scheduled and rescheduled. But underneath it, everything had changed. Dante found reasons to walk past her desk a dozen times a day. He asked her opinion on decisions he would never have consulted her about before, about which suppliers to trust, about which meetings to attend himself, and which to send someone else to handle. She began to see the calculations behind his choices, the careful, deliberate mind that ran beneath his cold exterior, and she found herself admiring him in ways she hadn't expected. "You're better at this than half the men I employ," he told her one afternoon, looking over a proposal she'd drafted for a new supplier contract. "You see things they miss." "I just pay attention," she said, though the compliment warmed her more than she wanted to admit. "That's rarer than you'd think." He set the papers down and looked at her, and there it was again, that same unguarded honesty that had frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting honest instead of safe. And I don't know how to give you honest without giving you all of it," he said. "The parts of my life you'd rather not know about." "Try me," Elena said, setting down her pen, giving him her full attention. Dante was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "My father built this business from nothing," he said. "Warehouses, shipping routes, contracts that moved more than what was written on the paperwork. He taught me that the world doesn't hand you anything, that you take what you need, and you protect what's yours, whatever that takes. I grew up watching him make decisions that most people would call unforgivable, and when he died, I inherited all of it, the legitimate parts and the parts that aren't." "Do you regret it?" Elena asked softly. "Any of it?" "I used to tell myself I didn't have a choice," he said, "that this was simply what I was born into. But lately," he paused, his eyes finding hers, "lately, I've started wondering what my life would look like if I'd made different choices. If I'd built something cleaner, something I could offer someone without putting them in danger. Elena's breath caught. Is that what you're doing? Offering me something? I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. I only know that every time Victor's name comes up, every time I think about the danger circling closer to you because of me, it terrifies me more than anything has in years, and that scares me almost as much as losing you would. The confession settled over her like warmth spreading through her chest. She reached across the desk and covered his hand with hers, and he turned his palm up to hold hers properly, his fingers threading through hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd once believed about him. I'm still here, she said. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I just want you to be honest with me. Even when it's ugly? Especially then. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a slow kiss against her knuckles, and Elena felt the moment settle into something permanent between them, an understanding that couldn't be undone. That evening, Dante insisted on driving her home himself, dismissing Caleb for the night despite the ongoing danger, and Elena didn't argue, secretly grateful for the excuse to be alone with him a little longer. The car wound through the city streets, streetlights sliding gold across the windows, and neither of them spoke much, comfortable in a silence that felt entirely different from the tense quiet of the office. Can I ask you something? Elena said as they idled at a red light. Anything? Victor said something, the day he came to the office, about letting me sit in on your meetings instead of hiding me at a desk. Was he trying to provoke you, or was there something true buried in it? Dante's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the road as the light turned green. Victor likes to plant doubts. He's good at finding the cracks in people and widening them. He glanced at her. But if I'm honest, there's truth in it too. You're capable of more than scheduling my meetings, Elena. I've known that for months. I think I kept you at that desk because it was safer, for both of us, to keep you at arm's length. And now? Now I don't know how to keep you at arm's length anymore, he admitted, even if I wanted to. They pulled up outside her apartment building, and for a moment neither of them moved to end the drive. The engine idled quietly, the street lamp outside casting a soft glow through the windshield. Thank you for telling me the truth, Elena said, about all of it. Thank you for not running, Dante replied. She smiled, a real one this time, unguarded. I'm not the type to run from things that scare me. I never have been. That might be the most dangerous thing about you, he said, and there was warmth in his voice, something almost like affection breaking through the careful control he kept over everything else. She got out of the car and he waited, engine running, until she was safely inside the building, watching through the glass doors as she waved once before disappearing up the stairs. It was a small gesture, waiting to see her safely inside, but it settled something in her chest, a certainty that whatever this was becoming between them, it was built on something real. The next morning brought a different kind of tension. Elena arrived at the office to find Dante already deep in a phone call, his voice low and clipped, his free hand braced against his desk as though bracing for impact. She caught fragments through the door, warehouse, shipment, missing, and her stomach turned uneasy. When he finally emerged, his face was grim. One of our shipments went missing last night, he said. An entire truck, gone, along with the driver, no trace of either. Was it Victor? Elena asked, already knowing the answer from the hard set of his jaw. I don't know yet, but it has his fingerprints all over it. He's been circling for weeks, testing how far he can push before I push back. Dante rubbed a hand across his face, weariness showing through the cracks in his composure, for the first time since she'd known him. I need to handle this myself. I might be out of the office for a few days. Let me help, Elena said immediately. Whatever you need, calls, paperwork, covering for you here. I need you safe more than I need you helping, he said, his eyes softening despite the tension in the rest of him. Stay close to Caleb. Don't leave the building without him. And if anyone contacts you claiming to be from me, verify it before you believe a word. You're really worried, Elena said, seeing past his controlled exterior to the fear underneath. I've never had anything to lose before, he said quietly. Now I do. The words landed heavy between them, and Elena crossed the room without thinking, wrapping her arms around him, feeling him stiffen in surprise before he relaxed into the embrace, his arms coming around her, holding her tightly, his face pressed briefly into her hair. "Come back safe," she whispered against his chest. "I will," he said. "I promise you that." He left within the hour, and the office felt hollow without him, the usual rhythm of the day, disrupted by an undercurrent of worry that Elena couldn't shake. She threw herself into work, answering calls, managing the schedule, fielding questions from staff who sensed something was wrong, even if they didn't know the details. By mid-afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Tell your boss to check his warehouse on 5th before it's too late for the driver." Elena's hands went cold. She dialed Dante immediately, relaying the message word for word, and she could hear the shift in his voice instantly, urgency replacing the exhaustion from earlier. "Don't respond to that number," he said. "Don't engage with it at all. I'm heading there now." "Be careful," she said, fear tightening around her chest. "I will. Elena, listen to me. Whatever happens, stay where Caleb can see you. Don't leave the building." The line went dead, and Elena sat frozen at her desk, staring at her phone, the unknown number still glowing on the screen, a cold reminder of exactly how dangerous the world Dante lived in truly was. She thought about Victor's smile, oily and confident, and the way he'd looked at her like she was a piece on a board he intended to move for his own advantage. Caleb appeared at her side within minutes, his expression unreadable but alert. "Dante wants you moved to the safe office upstairs," he said. "Standard precaution." She followed him without argument, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong, every possibility that Dante might not come back the way he'd promised. The hours that followed crawled by in unbearable silence, punctuated only by the occasional buzz of her phone, updates from Caleb relaying brief, clipped information. "They found the truck. The driver is alive. Dante is handling it." It was nearly 9 at night when Dante finally walked through the door of the safe office, his shirt rumpled, a shadow of exhaustion under his eyes, but whole and unharmed. Elena was on her feet the moment she saw him, crossing the room in a few quick strides and throwing her arms around him without hesitation. "You're okay," she breathed against his shoulder. "I'm okay," he confirmed, holding her close, his hand pressing gently against the back of her head. "The driver's safe." Victor's message was a warning, not an attack. This time, Elena repeated, pulling back to look at him. "Dante, how many more times can there be before something goes wrong?" "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty raw and unguarded. "But I know I can't ask you to stay in the middle of it if you don't want to be." "I already told you," she said, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm not running. Not from this. Not from you." He looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and grateful flickering behind his eyes, and then he kissed her, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like an inevitability, something that had been building since the night he'd walked in on her by accident, and neither of them had been able to look away since. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Elena rested her forehead against his, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "Whatever comes next," she whispered, "we face it together." "Together," Dante agreed, and for the first time since the shipment had gone missing, some of the tension eased from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. Outside, the city lights glittered against the dark sky, indifferent to the storm still gathering on the horizon, a storm neither of them could yet see the full shape of, but one that was coming for them regardless, drawing closer with every passing day. 2 weeks passed with a fragile kind of peace settling over the office, though Elena could never quite forget the missing truck, the anonymous text message, the way Dante's face had gone hard and unreadable every time Victor's name came up in conversation. She had learned to read the small signs of tension in him, the way his hand would tighten around his coffee cup, the way his eyes would flick toward the window whenever an unfamiliar car idled too long outside the building. But there were good moments too. More of them than she had expected. Dante had started taking her to dinner after long days, quiet restaurants where no one recognized him, where he could set aside the weight of his business for an hour or two and simply be a man having dinner with a woman he cared about. He asked her about her life before the job, about the small town she'd grown up in, about her mother who still called every Sunday to ask when she was going to find a nice, stable man and settle down. What would you tell her? Dante asked one evening, swirling wine in his glass, if she asked about me. I'd tell her you're complicated, Elena said, smiling. And that complicated doesn't scare me. It should, he said, though there was warmth beneath the words rather than warning. Maybe, she admitted, but I've never wanted easy. Easy is boring. He laughed, a real laugh, low and unguarded, the kind she rarely heard from him, and something in her chest ached at the sound of it, at the privilege of being one of the few people who ever got to witness this softer version of him. It was during one of these dinners that Dante told her about his mother, a woman who had left when he was young, unable to bear the weight of the life his father had built. I used to think she was weak for leaving, he admitted, staring into his glass. Now I think she was the only smart one in the family. You're not weak for staying, Elena said gently. You built something out of what you were given. That takes its own kind of strength. Sometimes I wonder what I could have built if I'd been given something different to work with, he said quietly. A cleaner start, a different name. Would you change it? Elena asked. If you could? Dante considered the question for a long moment. A year ago, I would have said no without hesitation, he said. Now, I'm not so sure. Now there's someone in my life I'd like to give a cleaner future to, even if I can't give her a cleaner past. Elena reached across the table and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. I don't need a cleaner past, Dante. I need you, exactly as you are, choosing to be honest with me instead of hiding. He brought her hand to his lips, and the moment stretched between them, warm and full of promise, until his phone buzzed against the table, shattering the quiet. He checked the screen, and Elena watched his expression shift instantly, the softness draining away, replaced by the hard, calculating look she associated with his business dealings. I have to take this, he said, stepping away from the table toward the restaurant's entrance. She watched him through the window, his shoulders tense, his free hand raking through his hair as he paced the sidewalk outside, and when he returned, his face was pale in a way she had never seen before. What happened? She asked immediately. Victor's making a move, Dante said, sitting back down, though his body remained coiled with tension. He's trying to buy out one of my key suppliers, cutting off my access to the docks. If he succeeds, half my legitimate business collapses within the month. Can you stop him? I can try, but it means a meeting tomorrow, face to face, and it means bringing in people I'd rather keep away from you. He met her eyes, something apologetic in his expression. I need you to stay away from the office for a few days. Work from home. I'll have Caleb bring you anything you need. Dante, I want to help. I know, he said, his voice softening. And I love that about you. But this isn't paperwork, Elena. This is the part of my world I've been trying to keep you separate from. Please, let me handle it. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could be useful, that hiding away while he faced danger alone felt like abandoning him. But she saw the fear beneath his composure, fear not for himself but for her, and she found she couldn't fight him on it, not when his concern came from a place of love rather than control. Promise me you'll be careful, she said instead. I promise. The next few days passed in an anxious blur. Elena worked from her apartment, fielding calls and emails, staring at her phone every few minutes for updates that came less frequently than she wanted. Dante checked in when he could, brief messages that told her little beyond the fact that he was still breathing, still fighting to hold his business together against Victor's calculated pressure. On the third day, Caleb arrived at her apartment unannounced, his expression grim in a way that made her stomach drop before he even spoke. Dante needs to see you, he said. Now. What's happened? He'll explain, Caleb said, already moving toward the door. We need to go. The drive to the warehouse district felt endless, Elena's mind spinning through every worst possibility, and when they finally arrived, she found Dante standing outside a nondescript building, flanked by two of his men, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion as she stepped out of the car. What happened? She demanded, crossing the distance between them. Victor's supplier deal fell through, Dante said. I managed to convince them to stay loyal, but it cost me. Victor knows I'm not going to let him take what's mine without a fight, and that makes him more dangerous, not less. Then why am I here? Elena asked. You told me to stay away. Dante's expression softened, though the exhaustion remained etched into every line of his face. Because I needed to see you, he admitted. Because after 3 days of fighting Victor's people, I needed to remember what I was fighting for. Elena's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice, and she stepped closer, cupping his face in her hands. I'm right here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly enough that she could feel the tension slowly draining from his body, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply standing together in the fading evening light, drawing strength from each other amid the chaos surrounding them. There's something else, Dante said finally, pulling back to look at her, his expression serious. Victor's requested a meeting, face to face, both of us, to negotiate terms before this escalates further. He's insisted you attend as well. Me? Why? Because he knows how much you matter to me now, Dante said grimly, and he wants to use that leverage however he can. Elena felt a chill run through her, despite the warmth of his arms around her. You're not actually considering bringing me into that meeting. I don't want to, Dante admitted. But refusing might provoke him further, and I need to know what he's planning before he acts on it. I promise you, Elena, I will not let anything happen to you. But I need you to trust me on this. She searched his face, seeing the conflict there, the desperate desire to protect her warring against the practical need to understand and neutralize the threat Victor posed. Okay, she said finally, I trust you. The meeting was set for 2 days later, at a private restaurant Victor owned on the edge of the financial district, neutral ground by Mafia standards, though Elena understood there was nothing truly neutral about walking into the territory of a man who had already shown he was willing to use her as a pawn. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing something professional and unassuming, and Dante met her at her apartment beforehand, his own composure carefully rebuilt, the vulnerable man from the warehouse replaced once more by the controlled, calculating boss she'd first come to know. Stay close to me the entire time, he instructed as they drove toward the restaurant. Don't engage with Victor directly, unless I indicate it's safe to. If anything feels wrong, you leave immediately, no questions asked. Caleb will be waiting outside. I understand. Elena. He reached over and took her hand at a red light, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Whatever happens in there, know that I love you. I should have said it before now, but I need you to hear it before we walk into that room. Her heart swelled, despite the fear tightening her chest. I love you too, she said, which is exactly why I need you to come out of this in one piece. I intend to, Dante said, though the grim set of his jaw suggested he understood better than she did just how dangerous the coming hour might prove to be. The restaurant was elegant, dimly lit, the kind of place designed to project wealth and power in equal measure. Victor was already seated when they arrived, flanked by 2 men Elena didn't recognize, his smile as oily and confident as ever as he rose to greet them. Dante, Elena, he gestured toward the empty seats across from him. So glad you could both join me. Elena sat beside Dante, her hands folded carefully in her lap, forcing her expression into something calm and unreadable, despite the fear churning beneath the surface. Victor's eyes lingered on her a moment too long before shifting to Dante, and the negotiation began. Careful, calculated words exchanged across the table, each man testing the other's resolve. I'll be direct, Victor said eventually, leaning back in his chair. I want the Eastern Docks. You've had control of them for years, and frankly, Dante, your father's territory is overdue for new management. The docks aren't for sale, Dante said flatly. Everything's for sale, given the right incentive. Victor's gaze slid toward Elena again, and this time the implication was unmistakable. I'm sure we could find something you'd be willing to trade. If you're threatening her, Dante said, his voice dropping into something low and lethal, this conversation is over. I'm not threatening anyone, Victor said smoothly. I'm simply pointing out that you have something to lose now, Dante. Something you didn't have before. Men who have something to lose tend to be more reasonable in negotiations. Elena felt her pulse pounding in her throat, but she forced herself to remain still, to project a calm she didn't fully feel, understanding instinctively that any visible fear would only strengthen Victor's position. "The docks stay mine," Dante said. "But I'm willing to discuss shared access to the northern route, if that eases your concerns about expansion." The negotiation continued for another 20 minutes, tense and careful, each concession weighed and measured, until finally Victor sat back, seemingly satisfied with the shared access agreement, though the predatory gleam in his eyes suggested this was far from over. "A pleasure, as always," Victor said as they rose to leave, extending a hand toward Dante, who shook it with visible reluctance. Then Victor's attention shifted to Elena, and he extended his hand toward her as well. "Elena, it was lovely to finally see you in a room where you belong, rather than hidden away at a desk." Elena shook his hand briefly, refusing to let her discomfort show. "Mr. Salazar." "I do hope we'll see more of each other," Victor added, his eyes glinting with something calculating. "You're far too interesting to remain hidden." They left the restaurant in tense silence, and it wasn't until they were safely in the car, Caleb pulling away from the curb, that Dante finally exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "That went better than I expected," he said, though his voice remained tight. "He's not going to stop, is he?" Elena said quietly. "Not really." Dante's jaw tightened. "No," he admitted. "He's not. But we bought ourselves time, and time is something I can work with." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaustion from the tension of the meeting finally catching up with her. "I'm glad it's over." "It's not over," Dante said gently, wrapping an arm around her. "But we survived it together. That's what matters right now." As the car wound through the city streets, carrying them away from Victor's territory and back toward the fragile safety of their own world, Elena found herself wondering how many more meetings like this one lay ahead of them, how many more careful negotiations would be needed to keep Victor's ambitions at bay, and whether their fragile happiness could truly survive the storm still building on the horizon. The fragile peace lasted 11 days. Elena knew the exact number, because she had counted every one of them, marking off each morning she woke beside Dante without an urgent phone call. Each evening they managed to share dinner without an interruption from his phone. She had started to believe, foolishly perhaps, that the worst of it might be behind them, that Victor had accepted the shared access agreement and retreated to lick his wounds. She should have known better. It was a Tuesday when everything unraveled. She was leaving the office later than usual, having stayed behind to finish a report Dante needed for a morning meeting, when a car pulled up alongside her as she walked toward the parking garage. She didn't recognize the vehicle, didn't recognize the two men who stepped out until it was too late to run, until a hand clamped over her mouth, and the world spun sideways into darkness. When she woke, she was in an unfamiliar room, her wrists bound loosely to a chair, her head throbbing from whatever they'd used to keep her sedated during the transport. The room was sparse, industrial, the kind of space that belonged to a warehouse or storage facility, and through a small window she could see it was still dark outside, though she had no way of knowing how many hours had passed. The door opened, and Victor Salazar stepped inside, his expression pleasant in a way that made her skin crawl. "Elena," he said, as though greeting an old friend rather than a woman he'd just had kidnapped. "I do apologize for the theatrics." Dante can be remarkably stubborn when it comes to reasonable negotiations, and I've found that stubborn men respond better when properly motivated. "He'll kill you for this," Elena said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear clawing at her chest. "He'll try," Victor said, unbothered. "But first, he'll give me exactly what I want. The Eastern Docks, full control, no more shared arrangements. And once I have that, you'll be returned to him, safe and sound, none the worse for wear." He crouched slightly, bringing himself to her eye level. "Assuming, of course, that he cooperates quickly, I'd hate for anything unpleasant to happen while we wait." "You're a coward," Elena spat. "Using me, because you can't beat him honestly." Victor's pleasant expression flickered, something colder showing through. "Careful, Elena. I'd hate to have to teach you some manners while we wait for your beloved Dante to see reason." He left her alone after that, the door locking behind him, and Elena spent the following hours working at the ropes binding her wrists, her mind racing through every possibility, every way this could end. She thought about Dante, about the fear that must be consuming him right now, about the promise he'd made to keep her safe, and the guilt he would carry if anything happened to her despite it. She refused to let it happen. She refused to be the reason Dante lost everything, refused to become simply another piece Victor moved across his board without consequence. Hours passed, marked only by the changing quality of light through the small window, before she finally heard raised voices outside her door, familiar and furious. "Where is she?" Dante's voice, low and lethal, carried through the walls with terrifying clarity. "Right where you'd expect," Victor's voice replied, still maddeningly calm. "Sign the transfer papers, and she walks out of here unharmed. Show me she's alive first." The door opened, and Elena's heart leapt at the sight of Dante standing in the doorway, flanked by Caleb and several other men she recognized from the office, though the relief on his face when he saw her was quickly replaced by fury as he took in the ropes still binding her wrists. "Elena." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, kneeling beside her chair, his hands working at the ropes with barely controlled fury. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said, though her voice trembled. "Dante, don't sign anything for me. Don't give him what he wants." "I'm not letting anything happen to you," Dante said fiercely, finally freeing her wrists and pulling her into his arms. "This is very touching," Victor said from the doorway. His men fanned out behind him. "But I believe we have business to conclude." Dante rose slowly, positioning himself between Elena and Victor, his expression having transformed into something cold and calculating that Elena had never witnessed before. "You made a mistake, Victor," he said quietly. "You could have taken the docks through business. Instead, you touched something that isn't yours to touch." "Sentiment makes men weak," Victor said, though something in his confidence wavered as he took in the number of Dante's men now surrounding the room. "I simply used the tools available to me." "And I'll use the tools available to me," Dante said, "starting with making sure you never have the opportunity to threaten what's mine again." What followed happened quickly, a tense standoff of words and careful movement, Dante's men closing in, as Victor's own guards realized they were significantly outnumbered. Elena watched, her heart pounding, as Victor's confidence crumbled in real time, his careful calculations having failed to account for just how thoroughly Dante would mobilize to protect her. "This isn't over," Victor said, backing toward the door as his own men lowered their weapons, recognizing the impossibility of their position. "You'll regret this, Dante." "I doubt it," Dante replied coldly, "but you'll regret ever thinking you could use her against me." In the end, Victor was allowed to leave, though the terms of his departure were made clear in ways that left no room for future ambiguity. His access to the shared docks revoked entirely, his standing among the other business families in the city significantly diminished by the failed kidnapping attempt. Word traveled fast in their world, and by morning, everyone would know that touching anyone connected to Dante Calloway carried consequences no rational man would risk twice. But in the immediate aftermath, none of that mattered to Elena. All that mattered was the warmth of Dante's arms around her. As Caleb drove them back toward the city, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, as she rested against his chest, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the fear she'd been holding back throughout the ordeal. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice breaking for the first time since she'd woken up bound to that chair. "I know," Dante said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I was terrified too. When I got the call that you were missing, I thought—" He stopped, his arms tightening around her. "I've never been that afraid in my life, Elena. Not once. Not even when my father died and I inherited everything. Nothing has ever scared me the way losing you scared me tonight." "You didn't lose me," Elena said, tilting her head up to look at him. "You came for me." "I will always come for you," Dante said, his voice fierce with certainty. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, I will always come for you." They arrived back at his penthouse rather than her apartment, an unspoken agreement that she needed the added security his home provided, at least for tonight. He drew her a warm bath, sat with her while she processed the shock of the day, held her through the night as she finally allowed herself to sleep, exhausted from everything her body and mind had endured. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, disoriented for a moment, before the memories of the previous day came rushing back. Dante was beside her, already awake, watching her with an expression of quiet tenderness that made her chest ache. "Good morning," he said softly. "Is it over?" she asked. "Really over?" "Victor won't try anything like that again," Dante said. "Word will spread through the entire city by tonight about what happened. No one crosses a line like that without severe consequences, and everyone will understand now exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect you." Elena studied his face, seeing the exhaustion still lingering beneath his careful composure, the toll the previous day had taken on him despite his attempts to remain strong for her sake. "Dante, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Anything." "Is this what our life is going to look like?" she asked. "Kidnappings and standoffs and constant danger? Because I told you before that I wasn't afraid of complicated, but I need to understand what I'm actually choosing if I stay." Dante was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "I won't lie to you," he said finally. "There will always be some risk, in a life like mine. Men like Victor exist, and there will always be others like him testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses. But yesterday taught me something too, Elena. It taught me that I'm not willing to lose you to protect some idea of keeping you separate from my world. I'd rather bring you fully into it, protected properly, understood properly, than keep pretending I can shield you from a distance." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I want you beside me," Dante said, taking her hands in his. "Not hidden at a desk outside my office, not kept carefully separate from the parts of my life that matter most. I want you to know everything, to understand the full weight of what you'd be choosing. And I want you to choose it anyway, with open eyes, because you want to build something real with me, not because you stumbled into it by accident." Elena's heart swelled at the sincerity in his voice, at the respect underlying his words, the recognition that she deserved to make an informed choice rather than simply being swept along by circumstances beyond her control. "I choose it," she said without hesitation. "I choose you, Dante. All of it, the danger and the complexity and everything else that comes with loving you. I chose it the night you walked in on me, and looked away, instead of taking advantage of the moment. I chose it every day since, watching you fight to protect what matters to you. Yesterday didn't change that. If anything, it made it clearer." Dante pulled her close, his relief palpable in the way he held her, the tension finally draining from his shoulders as he accepted her answer. "Then let's build something real," he said against her hair. "Together, properly, no more hiding." Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place in that penthouse. Two people choosing each other fully, despite every danger the choice carried, laying the foundation for whatever came next, together, unshakable, ready to face it as one. 3 months after the kidnapping, Elena stood in front of a full-length mirror in Dante's penthouse, smoothing down the fabric of a deep green dress, watching her own reflection with a mixture of nerves and excitement that she hadn't felt in years. Tonight was different from every meeting, every dinner, every quiet moment they'd shared since Victor's failed attempt to use her as leverage. Tonight, Dante was hosting a gathering of everyone who mattered in his world, business partners, associates, the careful network of relationships that kept his empire running, and for the first time, she would be standing beside him, not as his secretary, but as the woman he loved, publicly and without hesitation. Their relationship had transformed steadily over the past months, moving past the careful secrecy of the early days into something solid and unshakable. Elena had left her position as his secretary, not because Dante wanted to hide her away, but because they'd both agreed that mixing every aspect of business and romance under one job title created complications neither of them needed. Instead, she'd taken on a new role within his organization, overseeing the legitimate side of his shipping business with a sharp, capable mind that had earned genuine respect from people who once dismissed her as simply the boss's secretary. "You look beautiful," Dante said from the doorway, watching her with the same intensity that had followed her since that first accidental night months ago. "Nervous," she admitted, turning to face him. "Everyone downstairs knows who I am now. Not just as your girlfriend, but as someone with real say in how the business runs. That's a lot of expectation to walk into." "You've earned every bit of that respect," Dante said, crossing the room to stand before her, straightening the strap of her dress with careful fingers. Anyone who doubts you tonight will learn quickly how wrong they are. She smiled, some of her nervousness easing at his confidence in her. Do you remember, she said softly, the night you walked in on me changing? I keep thinking about how different everything looked back then. I thought I might lose my job. I never imagined it would lead here. I think about it often, Dante admitted, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. It was the first time in years I'd been caught completely off guard. And somehow, despite the awkwardness of it, despite every reason I had to keep my distance, I couldn't stop thinking about you afterward. I think some part of me knew even then that everything was about to change. For the better, Elena said, leaning into his touch. For the better, he agreed. A soft knock interrupted the moment, and Caleb's voice carried through the door. Guests are starting to arrive, boss. We'll be right down, Dante called back, then turned his attention back to Elena, his expression growing serious. There's something I want to do tonight, something I've been planning for weeks. Before she could ask what he meant, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring, elegant and simple, catching the light in a way that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. Elena Marsh, he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability written plainly across his face. You walked into my life during a moment of pure accident, and you've stayed through every danger, every complication, every part of my world that most people would have run from without hesitation. I've never met anyone with your kind of courage, your kind of honesty, and I've never wanted anything the way I want a future with you. Will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes, overwhelming and joyful all at once, and she nodded before her voice caught up with her emotions. Yes, she managed finally. Yes, of course. Yes. Dante slid the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly with an emotion she rarely saw from him, and when he pulled her into a kiss, it carried all the weight of everything they'd survived together, every danger overcome, every wall broken down, every piece of trust carefully rebuilt after the chaos that had once threatened to tear them apart. I love you, Dante said against her lips. I should have said it more often these past months, but I love you more than I ever imagined possible. I love you too, Elena whispered. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. They descended the staircase together a few minutes later, Elena's new ring catching the light of the chandelier above, and the room fell into a hush as guests noticed, one by one, the significance of what they were witnessing. Dante didn't hesitate, didn't try to downplay the moment, or keep it quiet the way the old version of him might have. Instead, he raised his voice, addressing the room with quiet authority. Some of you have known Elena as my secretary. Others have come to know her as someone whose judgment I trust in matters of business. Tonight, I want you all to know her as my fiancée, the woman who will stand beside me in everything going forward, in business and in life. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd, followed quickly by applause, genuine warmth from those who had watched the transformation in Dante over the past months, who understood, even if they hadn't known the details, that something significant had shifted in the man they worked alongside. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Elena found a quiet moment near the balcony, looking out over the glittering city below, and Dante joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting against the top of her head. Any regrets? He asked softly. None, Elena said immediately. Every difficult moment led us here. I wouldn't trade any of it, even the parts that terrified me. I used to think love made men weak, Dante admitted, echoing sentiments Victor had once thrown at him with contempt. I've learned it's the opposite. Loving you has made me stronger than I ever was alone. It's given me something worth protecting, worth building toward, beyond simply expanding an empire my father left behind. What happens now? Elena asked, turning in his arms to face him. With the business, with everything we've been through? Now we build something new, Dante said, together. I've already started shifting more of our operations toward the legitimate side of things, the shipping contracts, the warehouse management, all the parts of this business that don't require looking over our shoulders every day. It won't happen overnight, but it's happening. For you, for us, for whatever family we build together. Elena's heart swelled at the mention of a future family. a life beyond the danger and uncertainty that had once defined their beginning. "I like the sound of that," she said, smiling up at him. "I do too," Dante replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "For the first time in my life, I'm not just protecting what I inherited. I'm building something I actually want to pass on someday, something I'm proud of, something that doesn't come with the weight of fear attached to it." Below them, the city stretched out in glittering silence, indifferent as always to the quiet transformation happening high above its streets. Two people who had begun as boss and secretary, thrown together by pure accident, now standing on the threshold of an entirely new chapter, one built on honesty, courage, and a love strong enough to survive every danger thrown against it. As the party continued behind them, laughter and conversation drifting through the open doors, Elena rested her head against Dante's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and understood, with complete certainty, that whatever challenges still lay ahead, they would face them exactly as they'd faced everything, since that first accidental glimpse changed the entire course of both their lives, together, unshakable, and entirely unafraid of what the future might bring. The night stretched on, warm and full of promise, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future felt not like something to survive, but something to look forward to. A life built not out of fear or obligation, but out of a love neither of them had expected, yet both had chosen fully, with open eyes and open hearts, ready for whatever came next.